When you hear the words OTF knife or out the front knife, chances are you're probably thinking of Microtech, or maybe even Guardian Tactical. If you're a little more budget-minded, good old AKC F16. Well, I'm here to tell you about the greatest OTF knife you haven't heard of and what makes it tick. This is the Axial Shift, or the Shift by Axial Knives. And it's a pretty new entry to the OTF world. Axial Knives is actually a pretty new entry just in general to the knife world. This particular one has a 20 CV blade, full aluminum construction, and a clever little two-way reversible pocket clip. It's made right here in the good old USA. And funny enough, it's actually made down the street from where I used to live, right here in Utah, which was pretty rad. We actually went to their facility and picked this thing up. The Axial Shift is proven to be a pretty cool OTF. As you guys know, with all the gear that we get here on the channel, we like to run it through the paces before we even show you about it, so we can tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, why you may want it, why you may not want it, and this OTF has been no exception to that rule. If anything, we've actually probably abused it a little bit more than normal just because of my OTF philosophy, which we're gonna dive into here in just a second. So I'm gonna take this thing apart. I'm gonna show you guys all the black magic on how OTF knives work. I've actually got a couple other examples here as well to show you some differences. We're also gonna look at how dirty this thing is because you really did beat the heck out of this thing. Just gonna grab my NAF's tool burrito real quick. If you guys don't have one of these yet, definitely get one. There's a link down in the description. This video is not sponsored by NAF's, but I love Ben and he makes great stuff. This video is, however, sponsored by you guys. So if you head over to patreon.com, I've got these lucky wild pennies for $5 a month. I'll make you a handmade penny. I'll write you a handmade note. I actually developed this while I was hoboing around the United States when I was younger. That is the actual story of why that thing exists. So if you want a cool thing, head over to patreon.com, support the channel. So here's the thing with OTF, guys, and here's kind of my whole philosophy around them. For years, I have been worried. Guys, the NAF's tool burrito actually has some little magnets on it to hold your pieces. I'm gonna use that while we take this apart. Anyways, for years, I have been worried about using OTFs in any sort of a real capacity. They always just seemed like they were delicate or like they were gonna break. I don't know. It just felt like they wouldn't be able to hold up to the rigors that I usually put my gear through. But we've been doing a lot of pocket checks lately here on the channel. I've talked to some people that have been using OTFs in kind of like tough use, hard use, everyday actual scenarios. So I was like, man, I really need to give it a shot. When we got the opportunity to take a look at the Axial Shift, I was like, okay, this is the OTF that I'm just going to treat like garbage. I'm gonna do drywall work with this thing. I'm gonna sleep in the dirt with this thing in my pocket. I'm gonna work on motorcycles. I'm gonna work on my van. I'm gonna do all the things that I would do with a folding knife and then do them like a little bit meaner than I normally would to see if an OTF really could hold up to the rigors of what I was doing. And I'm happy to report, at least as far as the Axial Shift goes, this thing took a beating and just kept asking for more, which was pretty dang cool to see, especially as somebody who's been OTF skeptic. I mean, I've been carrying this thing for probably, I don't know, almost a month now. Now, I've never actually taken this knife apart, so we're just making some guesses here on how to get the handles off, and then we'll show you guys all of the magic. Here we are on the inside. This thing is pretty good and full of a bunch of just fine dust. It looks like mainly what's affected it was the drywall work that I was doing with this thing. So, yeah. Pretty happy with how dirty it is and the fact that it kept on ticking. Because like I said, that's just one of the big reasons I've never really carried an OTF. So now that I have the Axial Shift taken apart and my example knives have magically taken themselves apart over here to the side, I'm gonna show you guys the basic principles on how an OTF works. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions with OTF knives is that your knife is constantly under spring tension, which actually isn't the case. And it's kind of cool how it works. So just to give you a couple of the basic parts, we have our rear detent, we have our front detent, obviously we have our knife blade inside of its frame, and then we have our spring pack. And our spring pack is made up of what we'll call the spring plate and of obviously the actual spring. Now, like I said, your OTF knife is not constantly under pressure. So your spring pack goes in essentially like this, with the back of the spring hooking to your knife blade. When you go to actuate your OTF, you push forward and you feel there's some spring tension there. As I push forward, that spring tension is pulling against my knife blade, which is locked in by the rear detent. As I pull, that spring will eventually overcome the rear detent and allow the blade to come forward. And now this is the cool thing, is your blade is actually firing forward in free space. It's not under spring tension firing it forward. It was the tension that you built up to release the rear detent. And then in closing it, it's the exact same idea. You're ramping up backwards and then firing the blade to the rear. And it's at the front or the rear that your spring pack will reconnect essentially with your knife blade, hooking up and firing. And that's how an OTF works. It's pretty dang cool how it works, that that thing is just firing inside and that you're not under constant spring pressure. Now, just to take a quick look at some other versions of the OTF out there, we have an inexpensive AKC F16. You can see very similar operation. You have a front detent, you have a rear detent. This particular one, the spring pack looks a little bit different. Of course, every company's gonna have their own secret sauce, their own way that they do it. AKC's actually using 2 springs in theirs. And that's just what they needed, I guess, to get the proper action going that they wanted. Guardian Tactical is kind of a fun one. They have their front and rear detents on one side of the handle, and they've also got some kind of interesting different ways for their spring pack and their knife blade to work together. But again, still the basic principle that we're seeing here with the Axial Shift. It's kind of a cool thing to see how your stuff works, and I think opening up your knives is a cool way just to know how they work so that you're not scared to take them apart and clean them. Our Axial Shift does need a cleaning, but I'm actually gonna put it back together and tell you guys what our experience has been with the shift and if we would recommend it. All right, and we're all back together, firing like normal. The Axial Shift has been a pleasure to carry. The knife itself has performed amazingly. And really at the end of the day, this knife has broken some of the prejudice that I've had against carrying OTFs on a regular basis. Now, when it comes to carrying OTFs, I've always been able to see the utility in it. OTFs are great one-handed opening closers. They're great for gloved hands. They're great for a ton of different applications that I can see in the world. The problem is that I'm usually so hard on my stuff, my service intervals are way farther in between than they should be, that I'm always worried I have to baby an OTF. And maybe that's an experience that you've had with other ones out there, but I can say for sure that the Axial Shift can take a beating and keep coming back for more. That being said, we have put this thing through the ringer. You might be asking yourself, well, have you had a single misfire? I have. I've had a couple misfires with the Axial, but I didn't have any misfires until after I had skim coated and completely sanded a room 3 different times and filled this thing with a bunch of gypsum and drywall patch dust. Then I had a couple misfires, but it hasn't been consistent, it hasn't been all the time. Every OTF that I've ever had the pleasure of carrying and testing out for a short while has had a misfire or 2 here or there. To have the Axial have one under those conditions seems completely reasonable to me. Now, Axial as a company, they're new, they're young, they're up and coming, but they have some really great institutions in place already for people who are interested in being customers of their products. They have a lifetime warranty, and they say on their website it's a no BS, no hoops lifetime warranty. They're looking to take care of you no matter what the issue is that you have with your knife. They also have a lifetime warranty, sharpening, and tune-up service, which I think is a really great thing, especially if you're a little nervous about taking apart an OTF. Something else to note about Axial is that the Shift is 100% made in the USA. All the parts are made in the USA, everything's done here. Almost every single thing is done in-house at Axial HQ, and they're currently working to get everything done in-house there. Now, if you're looking at other knives on the Axial website, just something to make note of, some of their stuff is import, some of their stuff is USA made. So if any of those qualifications are important to you, just make sure that you're paying attention to what the product description says. They're very upfront about which knives are import, and they're very upfront about which knives are made in the USA. Overall, I would say that walking in with the biases that I had against OTF knives, with the Shift being able to break down some of those barriers and really kind of convert me to the idea of like, I think I'll probably throw an OTF in my pocket more often than I have been. And I think that that OTF is probably gonna be the Axial Shift, because this thing has just, honestly, it's just been a pleasure to carry. And you know, they come in a couple bucks less expensive than maybe like a Guardian Tactical 035 Recon or like a Microtech Ultratech. So if you've been in the market for an OTF, or if you're looking to get a new OTF, or you're looking to just try out something new and exciting in the knife world, the Axial Shift has my full recommendation, and don't be afraid to use it. Catch you on the next one.